Dear Earthmates, today we are visiting Joanne Leedom-Ackerman in the United States. I owe meeting her to PEN International, the World Association of Writers, and thank you so much for accepting this interview.
Glad to be here.
And your new book, Burning Distance.
Burning Distance. We both have.
Yeah, and we are burning distance by.
we're on virtual screens, so there's.
Yes. Yes. This and we can start with this novel.
Okay.
I learned that you have spent a long period of time on it, which is very nice.
Yes.
For those who haven't had a chance to read it, it's very new. How did the idea came?
Okay. This novel, as I tell people, is sort of a testament to persistence as a writer, because I lived in London in the early 90s when the Soviet Union was dissolving, the Berlin Wall had fallen, European Union was coming together, democracy was in ascendancy, and my children were, when we moved there, 9 and 11. And it was a very interesting time. And in late 1990, if you recall, Iraq invaded Kuwait. My youngest son then was 10 years old. This son has now become quite a well-known novelist himself, and as many years have gone by. But also, even at that time, was very observant and understanding of international affairs. So we picked him up from summer camp, and we explained what had happened over the summer. One of his good friends at the American school was the son of the Kuwaiti ambassador, and one of his other good friends was from Iraq. And his first response was, well, what happens to Alex and Talal? And as that year when school opened, every time Talal, the son of the Kuwaiti ambassador, visited, there were 2 bodyguards outside our house. And Alex never returned to the American school, the Iraqi student. And so I began to think, here's this school with all these children in it who are connected to really some of the, the diplomats, the heads of companies, a whole bastion of parents who are sort of running parts of the world. And you hear these children connecting with each other and becoming friends, not having any sense that there are barriers they need to worry about, that they can just all be friends. Because both of my sons had friends from across the globe. And we couldn't do this because it was Ramadan. We couldn't do that because there was this Chinese holiday, and they just took that for granted. And that was a lovely idea, that the globe could be connected. So I began thinking of that. That was the novelist in me. I had been a journalist, and the journalist in me, after the first Iraq War happened, began to look at all the weapons that had contributed to that war, and especially the components of the weapons of mass destruction. And so I began doing extensive research. And this, in many ways, was before the internet was just beginning. So all my research was in news clippings, and I have folders of news clippings, and then reading books and realizing how much of this weapons and the components of the weapons of mass destruction were sold to Iraq and also Iran by the West, who then went to war to get rid of all that we had sold them. And so these 2 very different kind of components were working in my head. But because as a novelist, you need to find the voice that can tell the story and the voice that you believe, I was much more confident in taking the voice of a young girl, 10 years old, who grows up and begins to see this and shape this world. And I then, as a novelist, had to learn how to weave all these pieces together. So had my novel been published when I thought it was done, it would have been fairly prescient of what was to come, because it was before 9/11, but it wasn't. So I went on and wrote the next novel, and then I wrote the next novel. And all that time, I was learning to become a better and better novelist and weave together this very complicated story, because it was complicated, and really make it seamless. And so for me, the interesting thing is that these novels are now coming out. So this one has come out next year. Another novel, The Far Side of the Desert, is coming out. There's an option on a third. And these novels deal with large global issues, but through the eyes of, in this novel, young people. The main character, Lizzie, is American, and she falls in love at school when she's a junior and he's a senior with a Lebanese Palestinian young man named Adel Hassan. And the novel is set over 15 years. And that's the story. It's being published as a thriller. It's actually a love story, a mystery, and a thriller, but it's being published as a thriller. So it's interesting to me. And I'm reading lots of thrillers these days.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And your novel has many dimensions. And the title, I'm, as a non-native speaker, I read it in two ways. One is burning distance. The other one is burning distance. And both are correct, I think. The distance burns you, and also you can burn the distance with love and concern.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. At the end, well, actually, a word about titles, and many writers know this. If your book doesn't first get published and you go and you rewrite it, your agent will tell you, okay, now I'm going to resubmit it, but give it a new title. So, so this book has had many titles along the way. I'm happy with the one that it has now, Burning Distance. And that really, in the book, is explained as the distance that you need to keep from, in the Icarus metaphor, the sun. That thing which is both giving energy but can burn
Yes,
you out.
yes, of course.
And the father, the book begins when this young 10-year-old daughter races into her home when the phone is ringing, and the man on the other end of the phone says, "I need to talk to your mother." And the mother's not home, the father's not home, and he says, "Tell your mother to tell your father they've sanded his gas tank." Now she doesn't know what that means, but the mother knows. And that night she gets the message that the father's plane has crashed over the Persian Gulf. And that's sort of the mystery that runs through what has happened, why has that happened? And so Burning Distance relates to the work that her father was doing. But it also is the distance between these cultures, and how do you come together, and how do you close the distance?
This is a very fruitful title. Will a movie come?
I don't know. They're little tiny nibbles, but anybody that's certainly lives here in the U.S. knows that Hollywood is a bit of spider webs. I lived out there for 11 years, so the distance between an interest in the book and a movie is quite long, and many years. So I hope if a movie comes, it doesn't take as long as it took the book to get published. But I don't know. There's nothing signed. There's nothing in the works at the moment.
This is a wonderful novel, and I'm sure a very good movie can come out of this. Yes. One of the interesting things for me, as again a non-native speaker, is the nice global English, I want to call, without any locality of language use. But you are a world citizen, and your life, and your, maybe knowingly or not, because it has become your discipline, maybe self-discipline, you have had to address all sorts of people from our planet. So your use of English maybe has become less local in your international communication. And that has, knowingly or not, that is reflected here, I think.
Nice to hear. I did, Tariq, is you're now actually in Texas,
yes,
which is where I grew up. I grew up in Texas, but I grew up in Texas, and at the time I was growing up, I just saw the limitations, both in terms of civil rights and women and all, and I knowingly left there to get to see a larger world, to understand a larger world. And in seeking it, I'm just, was very fortunate in being able to live in a larger world, to live in Europe for 6 years, to work with International PEN, where we met, and to be able to head up the, the human rights work, and at one point was International Secretary of the organization. So I was traveling globally and getting to know people in so many cultures and appreciating the difference in cultures. And for this book, in order to try to get in and have the book have verisimilitude, I mean, I took Arabic lessons for years. I'm terrible. I can't really speak it very well, but I can say enough to say that I don't speak it very well in Arabic, and studied French. But it was important to know the different languages and to know the different ways that people viewed the world, which is all not from an American perspective.
True. And how did your love for literature begin?
Well, I think for many people, it's probably the same. Literature began to open up those doors. And even when I was, living in a loving family, and I must say, I can go back to Texas, my friends there have been some of the best readers and supporters. And, I'm heading back there and looking forward to it. But I knew the world was larger, and I had a mother who said, whenever you can travel, just go. She hadn't been able to, just go see whatever you can. And I wasn't able to always do that, but through books, I could begin to see experience that wasn't mine through books, and see feelings that I didn't even really know about through books. And I can still remember in college reading James Baldwin's Another Country, and just getting, first of all, a glimpse of a world that was so interesting and so, in many ways, different than mine. And having a glimpse, you think I could ever do that? Do you think I could ever write a novel? Just that flickering, that was so interesting to me to be able to do that. And so I think that's how I got involved. I just wanted to see a bigger world than I lived, and books gave me that opportunity.
You mentioned James Baldwin.
Yes.
I met him when I was young in Istanbul. One of his plays was on stage, and I watched it. And
Okay.
Very unique personality.
Yeah. He opened the world. One of my good friends is a Iranian writer named Nazar Nafisi, who wrote a book called Reading Lolita in Tehran. And she and I often have, long literary conversations. And what's interesting is she from Tehran, me from Tehran. We both love James Baldwin. I mean, so it's, and she's from a whole different culture. And, literature done well, where you're able to penetrate the heart of people. You both see the individuality, but you also see the commonality of human beings.
Exactly. And yes, to me, sincerity is important. I mean, if a writer does not feel some sort of, a little bit of pain at least, and trying to express, I mean, instead of, in Turkish we say, to play for the viewers, in soccer, for example, to play for the viewers, not for the match, but for show off, for all those things. But literature is a condensed expression of life experience, basically, and or that's, to me, very valuable. What was the first novel? When did you start writing your first novel?
Yeah. My very first one, I'm told, was when I was in the 4th grade at age 9, but I don't think that one counts.
It would count. I'm serious. It would count. Yes.
My first short story, I was in 2nd grade, and it ended. My mother kept it, so I know how it ended. The last line was, "P.S. The butler did it." It was a mystery. So, P.S. Pat, the butler did it. I think from a young age, I was involved in stories. I was a journalist in my early career, which was nice because as a journalist, I worked for an international newspaper, the Christian Science Monitor. And I was able to interview anybody, even though I was in my 20s. I could call up, senators or whatever. I was able to see so many different parts of life. And I was constantly taking down what they said. So I was constantly learning dialogue, and I was learning the discipline of writing every day, and I was getting paid. I mean, so it was really a very good early career for a novelist, because all those things go away because you don't get paid to write your novels early on. And you have to be disciplined because nobody's telling you, you have to write every day. And I mean, there's some exceptions, but most writers, go through a period of, figuring it out. And as a journalist, I need to learn the difference between being a journalist and a novelist, because there is a difference. The journalist in me still keeps elaborate facts to check, because I really want to make sure I either have the facts correct, or if I'm not going to use them, I know I'm not using them and why. But the novelist has to be free to imagine and to leap beyond what the facts are and find the human heart. So it's a balancing act, but it's good training. I'm not sure that answered your question, but
yeah, yes, it did wonderfully. Thank you. And I asked you about your marriage name and surname, Ackerman, and a broad horizon came up.
yeah.
Would you kindly repeat it for our?
My maiden name was Leedom, which is Scotch Irish, but Ackerman means farmer, acre man. And from what I understand, I know my husband's family came from Ukraine, and Russia, that area, but also from Hungary, and some parts of it from England, and from Central Europe. And they came over in the pogroms of the early 1900s. At least some of them did. And so we merged, and we got married in the early 1970s. And back then, I can remember our discussion, because friends of ours were getting married and the wife was keeping her name. And my husband said, when I get married, I just want us to have the same name. I don't care. I take her name, but I want us to have the same name. So when he proposed and we got married, I said, well, I'm a writer and I write under my name. So, I want to keep Leedom. He got very quiet. And then he went home. And he said all he did is look at his father, and he called me up and said, this won't work. He wasn't going to be able to take my name. So I said, okay, I'll hyphenate my name and I will keep both names. And it's sometimes a pain because I don't know if I'm Ackerman or Leedom-Ackerman or Leedom, but I like that hyphen because it really bridges, it bridges our families. Yes. And my son had my name as a middle name.
Yes, a hyphen is a bridge, in a case like this especially.
When I sent my first byline over with this hyphenated name, I don't, for those who used to work in these newsrooms, there was a big horseshoe, which was the copy desk, and the head of the copy desk sort of ran the show, and he comes over, and your copy was glued together with rubber cement. So it was this long trail of pages, and he comes over the trail of pages and like 6:30 in the morning, because I was early, and he says, what's this? And he points to my name, and I said, well, I got married. He said, but it's hyphenated. And I said, yeah, I got married. It's Leedom-Ackerman. He said, well, that's not our style. I said, I'm sorry, it's my name. So they had to change their style, use a hyphenated name.
And it is your style. Who were some of the novelists that influenced you in early years and then later on?
Okay, well, in addition to Baldwin, probably my all-time favorite, my favorite's even a diminutive word. I think one of the masters of the kind of writing I like is Tolstoy in War and Peace. The ability to take a large issue, a large part of history, and weave a narrative and a story of characters, is masterful. For whatever one thinks of Tolstoy as a person or all this other, but it's one of the great pieces of literature. And I tend to have really gravitated to people who do that. Nadine Gordimer in South Africa, Graham Greene in the US, Philip Caputo, Toni Morrison, a number of in the US, a number of African American writers I've really learned so much from, including Baldwin, Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright, Morrison, and there are just so many. And Margaret Atwood. I've read so much of Margaret Atwood. The list goes on. And now, because my book is being published as a thriller, I wasn't as conscious of reading thrillers. Le Carré is probably one of the masters, but I've really grown to appreciate the writers who take some large global issues and then weave it into that form,
Mm.
and make you want to keep turning pages, but know the characters at the same time.
Yes. Tolstoy is, to me, a very colorful character, and I've written a novel, a play, sorry,
Mhm.
a play about him and his wife. Uh, I spent quite a lot of time on that,
I
enjoying
think his character and relationship with his wife is not, you know a lot more, but from what I've read, it's not one necessarily would hold up as an ideal. But
no, very
the lives of writers are often quite different than what's on the page. So
yes, 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 very interesting relationship there. How about your interest in pen? How did you have an idea about pen, and how did you get into this world?
when I had just had my first child, and I lived in New York City, and we moved to Los Angeles. So I was out in Los Angeles. I didn't know many people. Was a little reluctant to be in Los Angeles, and I didn't know very many writers. I was teaching at the time, and I was invited to a pen dinner, and I was meeting writers, so it was a community. And I think many people first gravitate to pen as a community of writers, and I over time I began to tell people when I had to be on the road and speak about it that it really was like a three-legged stool. You had the community, and then you had the freedom to write work, and then you had the literature. But I first gravitated there just for the community of writers. I was invited to a lunch or somebody's home out there, and we began writing postcards for a writer in China, Wei Jingxing, who later, decades later, I actually met and was, worked as many did to try to get him out of prison. And that element of pen, which is, for lack of a better word, the human rights or civil rights element, to work on behalf of writers who cannot write freely, really, appealed to me, and it linked to how I had grown up and things I'd wanted to do and had worked when I'd worked in civil rights area. So that was very engaging. And then at that time, America had two pen centers, one in Los Angeles and one in New York. And I was in 1988 was elected president of the LA Center, and it became Penn USA West. And that happened to be the year of the fatwa against Salman Rushdie, Tiananmen Square. We doubled membership. It was a very active year. And then the following year, I moved to London, and that's where Penn is headquartered. So I had gotten to know the international body and the people there, and I was asked to, work with the Writers in Prison Committee, and to chair it eventually. And then, that led to other things. It was just a natural gravitation of what my interests were, and I desire to know the world and know people living in different parts of the world. And as you know, it's a wonderful family. We have we have friends all over the globe that support each other.
Yes, indeed, indeed. And you wrote a wonderful book about your pen experience, and on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of our establishment, right?
Well, I was asked by Jennifer Clement, who was the president at the time,
yes,
to just begin sharing memories, because I had been involved in a long time. So I didn't set out to write a book, but I do write a monthly blog post. I post a blog once a month at least. And I thought, well, I can, once a month, I'll just post a memory. And so I began posting a memory every month. And then I said, well, I can do 2 a month. And then I began doing 3 a month. And by the end of it, I had covered, my, how many years? 30 years in Penn, which is about a third of its history. And I had been very engaged in the reorganization of Penn and seeing it transform itself into a more democratic organization. And I knew many of the people, and I had, just because I'm not very good at organizing papers, I just threw them into a drawer. So I had all these files of conferences and everything there, so I could go back and, really make sure what I was saying was accurate. And there were wonderful talks and just forums in Penn, so I could really pull out the best parts of those and put them in blogs. And then somebody said, well, make it into a book. And fortunately, there was a British publisher who published all that into a book. What the book doesn't have, and I was able to put in the blog, are all the photographs So I have wonderful photographs of all of us, over 30 years. They're up on my blog post still. But it was a pleasure to do it. And it was nice I could do it for the centenary and just track that history, because the challenge with PEN is we're an organization of writers and nobody wanted to write the whole history because it's almost impossible. I mean, every PEN center has their own history and their own view. And it's just one of the really big grassroots organizations in the world.
Yes, maybe a kind of encyclopedia can be a project in all centers to write their, well,
but Jennifer did get a website. It's funding for a website. So there is the website where everybody can post their history.
Yes.
And I thought that was a wonderful idea. So there is a history on the website.
Yes.
But it's a remarkable organization.
Indeed. And so with this background, Ukraine, Russia, Hungary, you follow the news with a different eye, I'm sure, much from inside what's going on.
Well, I think we all despair a little bit of how the news is covered sometimes, at least in our country. It's being covered not as much as it used to be, because a lot of newspapers have had to fold their international bureaus, and it becomes partisan, and the global news doesn't have the same, it's not covered in quite the same way. So I despair a little bit sometimes, at least in the coverage in the US of global news.
Regarding the Olympics, when I'm in the States during the time of Olympic Games, I feel a little bit disturbed because only the US sportsmen, are covered, and we don't see the big picture. Well, I hope that can change. What is on your agenda as a novelist? Would you like to give a hint or not?
Well, next year, I'm happy to say I have another novel coming out. It's called The Far Side of the Desert. It's also an international global issues, and it begins in Santiago de Compostela, Spain, where actually the first time I was there was at a PEN Congress. And at that Congress, this isn't in the novel, but at that Congress, actually, Rushdie is one of the first early public appearances of Salman Rushdie. So it begins in Santiago de Compostela, Spain, with an event that sort of sets it off. And it's set with a family, two sisters, and it's a family, an American diplomatic family, and something uproots everything. And then it moves. It's in Spain, London, Washington, Gibraltar, and Morocco. So it has an international background. And I'm just rereading a novel that I've done that, my publisher has an option on another novel, and it's called Washington Days, Beirut Nights. So we'll see if that comes. And then I have another novel called California Story, and I'm working on another. So, I'm busy, and fruition, it seems to be coming at this stage, which is very nice for me.
Yes. And how do you write? Anytime, or in the morning, or at night? Just pen and notebook, paper, or directly computer? What are your preferences?
I can write anytime, anywhere, but my preference is to write in the morning. If I can have a day with nothing on my calendar for 6 hours, that's bliss. And when I'm writing the first draft of fiction, I usually have a pad and pencil, but very quickly it gets on the computer, and all the revisions are on the computer. And I used to, before COVID, I used to go out to restaurants and write. And so, wherever I was, I knew the restaurants, I knew where the plugs were. And I knew the restaurants where I could actually sit through 2 meals without taking up space they needed. So I'm pretty savvy on that. But COVID hit, and you couldn't go out to restaurants. So we sort of moved to be in the country more. And so I now have this wonderful chair that looks out on a river, and a little desk I can put in my lap. And if I'm there, I sit and just write at home. And I've learned to do that. So But being a journalist and being a writer, put me anywhere if I need to write, I'll write. And sometimes I'll be sitting outside and ideas will come and I'll just be on this little iPhone and I'll just click to the notes and start writing on that and transfer it.
Hmm. And how did becoming a mother affect your writing? Did it?
Of course. Yeah. Well, it opened up parts of my heart I didn't even know were there. But people used to say when I was writing and I had young children, "You're so disciplined to be a writer." And I'd say, "No, I'm so disciplined to be a mother." I'd be writing away and then I have to, elementary school is over and I'd have to close my notebook and go pick up the kids and stop writing. But as soon as I did that, the writing just went to the back of my mind, and I was just fueled every day with these, 2 wonderful children I had, which opened up my heart, the view of the world. And so it completely enriched it. It did close down the time I had at that stage. But I often tell especially young women, but I think it applies to men, that, you really can have it all, but you just can't always have it at the same time. Sometimes you just have to realize I only have a few hours to write right at this stage of my life, but do it. Don't not do it at all. If you write a few hours a day, you'll keep the flow.
True. And what would you suggest? What would you like to suggest to young Earthmates?
Earthmates, or just any? My suggestion is keep your heart open. Love as much as you can, read, and and this is something that I recently said to somebody at this stage of my life, but I think the earlier you learn it, the better. Something didn't happen we thought was happening, and somebody said, you must feel so bad about that. And I said, I have learned to be grateful to what comes to me and to spend no time in regret, which doesn't happen. So try to avoid regret. Just be grateful for what comes and build off of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
Dear Joanne Leedom-Ackerman. We're together.
Good. See you in person someday soon, I hope.
We are 2 Texans in a way.
No, we are. Well, I'll be in Dallas in the end of April. So if you come up to Dallas.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. My best wishes to you all as a family.
Thank you very much. Same to your family.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.